Chapter 17. The Attack with Hounds. October found the big black traveling up Sheep Creek with his gray mate and 4 new black pups. He was in splendid condition. The short summer hair had given place to luxurious fur, which fluffed out all over his body and made him seem stouter. There were just enough long coarse hairs to give him a mane, as well as keep the fur in shape and make it able to shed water. Soon his coat would be even heavier, in preparation for the intense cold of the winter nights. The 6 were strung out on one of the many game trails. First came the Black King, next to him his sharp-nosed, slim mate, and then the 4 big-boned, leggy pups. They trotted swiftly and unceasingly, ears cocked forward, sensitive nostrils always at work, and eyes scanning every object in their path. Early that morning they came to Great Pass, and looked down on the porcupine winding in a blue line among the endless evergreens. It was October the 14th. That night, after a rest in the thickets, they began to explore the winter range. Other wolves were there. The king studied the scent posts with utmost care, learning the presence of friends and of strangers. Suddenly he bristled and raised his head. While no other creatures were visible, he had detected the approach of other wolves. His mate advanced to stand beside him. The pups moved back to the edge of the bushes. Then they saw the other pack. In the lead came Grayback, proud of a black-coated mate, 2 friendly grays, and 4 big pups of the year. Pride, in fact, showed all over him. He came swaggering up to his brother as if to shove him out of the path. There was a tense moment as these 2 met. Neither had forgotten their parting. The king regarded this as his range. He had already had one bad experience with the Grayback, and he hated more interference. Yet he hesitated and stood there waiting. All might have been well if, when tension was at its highest, an avalanche had not crashed down the opposite mountain. Grayback, always nervous, instinctively surged to one side, coming in violent contact with the black, who misunderstood this and interpreted it as an attack. In a moment, the 2 were face to face, growling and slashing their teeth at each other. Still, there would not have been a fight if Grayback had not been, at heart, a coward. A cow moose came trotting from the direction of the avalanche. The black turned his head to see what might have scared her, and for an instant exposed his neck. It was too much for Grayback. He sprang. The 2 big wolves rose on their hind legs and clashed in the air. Sparring and tottering about, they suddenly locked and came crashing down among the brush. There was a scrimmage before they regained their feet, then a furious tangle of mouths and legs as they rose up again. Battling free, they circled and sparred, snapped and sprang back. This was Grayback's favorite mode of fighting, avoiding the deadly clinches while maneuvering for sudden slashes and getaways. The black tried the other's game, waiting patiently for a chance to bore in, but the fight continued, and still Grayback dodged, in and out and back again. By this time, both were cut about the head and bleeding. The black developed a new mode of attack. He maneuvered Grayback to the edge of the trail, and then charged so suddenly that the other would go down the slope in his nimble game of eluding. Again and again he did this. It worked Grayback into a frenzy. Finally the gray remained down the slope and contented himself with furious growls. The king stayed above and waited grimly. They got back their breath. When Grayback finally attempted to come up the slope, he saw something different in the look of the black, that odd pucker of the black brows, a more wicked flash of white teeth, a determination to end it. He hesitated, well knowing what that meant. Then, without showing the fear that was in his heart, he growled even more evilly and backed away. Soon he was gone, he and his, for his pack had slunk after him. The king went to the nearest stream for a drink, sloshed about in the water for a bit, and then felt as good as ever, better indeed, for he was cleaning up his range, freeing it of undesirables, and he liked the work. Soon he was roaring full cry down the valley on the trail of a young caribou stag, so gleefully that the other wolves who heard could not resist in joining in and sharing the sport. Once more, the king had come to his own. Again the valley of the Porcupine resounded night after night to the chorus of the wolves, as 20 strong they swept madly through the forest or over the ice with the great black leader bounding ahead. Presently, however, there were 2 camps in the king's lower range. The first of these was at the old cabin used by Jim, and now refitted to be serviceable for him and Johnny. The other was a new affair for 5 tents containing the equipment of Roger R. Jones and his 3 guides. With them were 16 dogs, the strongest collection ever seen in these mountains. To begin with, there were 2 bloodhounds to do the trailing. There were 8 half-breed wolfhounds to outrun and worry a wolf, and there were 6 fierce-looking mongrels to act as killers when the game had been brought to bay. Altogether, they presented a formidable array. "It won't be long now," was Mr. Jones's favorite expression. He used it more than once that first night he was camped beside the river and heard the wolves. In answer to them, there burst a great clamor from the excited dogs, all securely tied up for the night. Instantly, the wolves stopped their baying. "They'll be coming down here to investigate us," the head guide Steve remarked. "I wish I had some traps set. There's no telling how many there are, but it's plenty." A short time later, the dogs broke out in furious barking and continued the row all night. Steve and Jones spent all of the next day studying the tracks in the snow, working out the main routes around the lower valley and trying to decide where the wolves would be waylaid when the hunt was on. They saw nothing of the pack except the endless lines of footprints. On the following day, all 4 men started out with the dogs for a trial run. It was not their idea to find a wolf. They simply wanted to familiarize the dogs with their new surroundings. Special attention was given to making them avoid porcupines. On the 4th day, the dog pack was given more leeway. It scoured one of the mountains and ran down a male coyote. Steve was elated. "Did you notice," he said, "that the coyote didn't know where to run or what to do? It's a new game to the animals up here, and before they learn it, you may have some luck." Jones, too, was very cheerful over the prospects. "Tomorrow we'll try for wolves," he decided. At dawn, 2 of the men went across the valley and took stands on the ridge, from whence they could see in all directions. Steve and Jones managed the eager dogs, keeping them in control until a fresh track could be found. All of the men carried their rifles. The rallying call of a wolf had been heard in the evening previous. Steve led in that direction. After several miles, the dogs became unmanageable. Jones thought that they were simply riding, but as later events showed, they had passed within 100 yards of 2 wolves and had scented them. It was scarcely a minute before the bay of the bloodhounds began. Steve ran for the river while Jones followed the trail of dogs. The chase led to the ridge, then suddenly turned back and after a circle south, headed up the valley. Seeing the direction for certain, all 4 men gathered at the river and followed out on the ice. The pack was soon out of hearing, but there was a chance that the wolves would circle back if they were not overtaken. The 4 men walked as fast as they could and managed occasionally to find tracks which showed that the dog pack was still ahead. At noon, the first strays began to drift back to them. By 1 o'clock, they had collected 4 discouraged dogs for whom the pace had been too fast. Soon after that, they heard distant baying. The men took new courage and pressed forward. Up the ridge they climbed to a wooded basin which Steve had never before seen or even known to exist. Here they were met by one of the wolfhounds which, instead of being grayish, was striped with red and limped badly. Further on they heard a terrible din. Jones collapsed at this point and lay down. The others kept on. They met two more crippled dogs and could not stop them. A quarter of a mile further on, they found the place where the fight began. Here, there was a dead wolf in the snow and signs of a struggle at the base of a cliff. Further on, the remaining wolf had made another stand. Here, something strange had happened. The snow was blood-stained and trampled in all directions. Dogs lay about, licking their wounds or stretched out. Still, there were sounds of fighting ahead. They heard a roar, the battle cry of the king, which they were never to forget, and they came panting through the close-set dwarf spruce trees just in time to see the two gamest of the mongrels come staggering down the slope while away at full speed dashed two wolves, a big black and a small gray. At that moment a shot sounded from the lower end of the basin where Jones had been left. Steve ran back to learn what had happened, and found Jones leaning over a big gray wolf, Grayback, who had come limping down the trail to avoid the other men and had almost stumbled upon the prostrate Jones. It was hard to say which of them was more surprised, but the man had a powerful rifle and knew how to use it. Steve had heard of this oddly marked wolf and was tremendously interested. Taking along an impress of his paw, he went back to study the battle tracks. After a short time, he had correctly worked out the story of the chase. Grayback and a pup had been found by the pack in the lower valley. The two wolves had stayed together and circled until they had learned the size of the pack and the danger they were in. Then Grayback, thoroughly scared, had started for this wooded glade where he knew the big black and the other wolves were likely to bed for the day. He had been overtaken at the base of the cliff and had called for help. The wolves heard him. They had been attentively listening to the dogs for some time, but none stirred from his position except the black. He too heard, and he understood. His old comrade was calling. He was being attacked by the yowling dogs. The big wolf left the strip of woods on the run and rushed to the rescue, roaring defiance. After him trailed his mate, but she was far behind. Grayback's young companion had by that time been killed, and 5 of the dogs were crowding the older wolf, who had his back against the rock and was holding them off. Into this mass of yapping animals the king descended like a tornado, tearing dogs right and left and throwing them about in the way he had so often handled the big wolves. As other slower dogs came straggling up the trail, he piled into them too and cut them up mercilessly. How he hated dogs! It was one against a pack, but the clumsy big hounds were no match for such a wolf. They went down like 10 pins, and those that could still run tried to escape in any direction. The avenging fury in the great wolf had not abated. He followed them and threw them about some more. Then the men appeared, but the fight was won. If Grayback had known enough to stay with the black, he would have come through all right, but the coward had actually tried to sneak away as soon as he could, leaving his brother in the thick of the battle, surrounded by dogs. With his mind intent upon escape from danger, he had blundered into a much worse danger. That evening, Jones, Steve, and the other 2 men built a lean-to under one of the old spruce trees near the spot where Grayback had fallen. It was the best they could do so far from the base camp with night approaching. They had buried 5 dogs in their boulders and carried to their shelter 3 others that would probably die from wounds. The guides were worn out. Jones was ill. As they lay shivering among the hastily collected spruce boughs, Steve suddenly began to chuckle. "I've got an idea. I'm going to be warm," he cried, and taking the great wet pelt of Grayback from the pole on which it hung, he wrapped it about him. The other's wolf's hide he spread over Jones. "What's so humorous about that?" growled one of the shivering men. "We might wake you up in the night, mistake you for a wolf, beat you up and skin you." But Steve was comfortably snoring. Later, far off, somewhere in the mountains, a wolf howled. No answering sound came from the sleeping camp.